On today's Hot Sheet, I'm discussing January's FOMC meeting minutes, down payments shrinking for the first time in 5 months, and weekly unemployment report. Just got that today. It is Thursday, February 19, 2026. I am Byron Lazine, and the Hot Sheet starts now. Okay, live from Connecticut. It's a pleasure to be with you wherever you may be tuning in here today. Thanks for taking a part of your day, your morning here live to spend with me on the Hot Sheet. Appreciate you. I know there's a lot of alternatives. Well, maybe not in our industry on a live daily look back of the housing market every 24 hours, but there's just a lot of alternatives to do with your time, and I appreciate you spending a little bit of it with me here on the Hot Sheet. We've got meeting minutes from the Fed. We're going to start with that. And there does seem to be some disagreement that continues to roll over here with this current committee. Now, there's a lot of interesting discussion, and some of that took place actually at the last meeting about who's going to be leading the Fed going forward. Okay, what happens if no one is appointed? If Congress doesn't put through the appointee, being Kevin Warsh? They actually went through this during the meeting. So I'll uncover that for you. Okay. The meeting minutes, the FOMC, they produce these, 3 or 4 weeks or so after every single meeting. This one happens to be an 18-page document. It's got the United States Federal Reserve System seal on it. And it gives us an inside look, a little behind-the-scenes view of what the Fed was talking about. What were their discussions in the background? And, a lot of that gives us insights to how they're thinking about the future. Okay? Ultimately, the Fed was divided. Okay? During their January meeting, and they indicated that further rate cuts should be paused for now. That's why they didn't do anything, but could resume later in the year only if inflation cooperates. Now, we had a CPI report that has come out since this January 27th, 28th meeting that suggests inflation is cooperating, yet Polymarket and, Fed Watch over at CME Group are not showing any faith that the inflation cooperation that we're seeing right now is going to change anything inside of this current committee. A 93% chance that, come the March 17th meeting, which we're now under a month away from, 26 days, that there will not be a cut. 93% chance that there will not be a cut. And in fact, April, we know who's going to be leading the committee. Both of these meetings, Jerome Powell, 78% chance, no change. Okay, so the data that we've gotten here recently is that inflation is cooperating. Inside of the minutes, the Fed says, we think the impacts of tariffs on inflation are essentially going to pass through the system mid-year. Meaning everything, we're worried about inflation because of tariffs. We're worried about inflation because of tariffs. We're worried about, that story for a year now. They're now saying, halfway through this year, we'll be over it. So they have a timeline of when, hey, we're going to be checked out on that crutch. And they said that here in the minutes. So, inflation is cooperating now. They've already said this is going to pass through middle of the year. They're concerned about the tariffs. But they're still hanging on to, we're not at target. And I'm not talking about the store with the red dot. Their 2% target, that was a made up number from somebody in New Zealand who doesn't deal with the biggest economy in the world decades ago. Speaking of decades, what is inflation typically? Typically, it's over 2%. Since 1950, the average has been 3.5%. We're at 2.4 today. That'd be the third lowest decade. Where we are today, if it was a decade number, we'd be the third lowest since 1950s. Since 1950, the average on CPI has been 3.5. We're at 2.4, but we need to get to 2. What if you had a system where GDP was at 6 and inflation was at 3? Would that work? I think so. It certainly would. So being at 2.4, being, closer to 2% than we've been since 1950 on average, seems like inflation's cooperating. But this current committee wants to hang on to every last reason why to not lower the rates. Okay. If we go inside of the minutes here a little bit, and Nick Timmeros broke this down, Wall Street Journal broke it down on X. So some of the hawkish officials, remember, divided Fed, some people are hawkish. They want to keep rates the same, or even some are saying, hey, we may raise rates again. Some of those more hawkish members, some of those more hawkish officials, they would have supported a more neutral description in the FOMC statement to tease to the market the idea that a prospect of a cut or a hike are more roughly balanced. So, in considering the outlook for the monetary policy, several participants commented that further downward adjustments to the target range for the federal funds rate would likely be appropriate if inflation were to decline in line with their expectations. Now, inflation immediately after this meeting declined. Now, their expectations are getting to 2%, which we've never averaged since 1950. Okay, during the great financial crisis recovery, I mean, nobody was spending money. I mean, if you remember 2010, 11, 12, I mean, that was like the only 3-year period of my life where I felt like I'm going through a zombie land. It certainly wasn't the late 90s, the greatest time period ever. It was depressing. People were not spending money, not taking risk. You're not going to have inflation when nobody's spending money. So their expectations are 2%. We've never had it since 1950. And immediately after this meeting, they went down. So I don't know. They said in the minutes, hey, if inflation were to decline, then maybe we'll support a cut. So maybe that's good news for the future. Some participants commented that it would be likely appropriate, though, to hold the policy rate steady for some time as the committee carefully assesses incoming data. So they always are assessing this data. They don't use real-time data as it relates to shelter, though. And a number of these participants judged that additional policy easing may not be warranted until there was clear indication that the progress of disinflation was firmly back on track. We have now seen that after this meeting. Disinflation does not mean that we are seeing affordability. Those are two different things. But if they're hung up on inflation, and inflation is obviously is disinflating by definition, inflation is going down, then that should be in line with potentially a future cut. What I think the Fed did wrong to put us in this position is they waited too long to start cutting. They waited until 8 days after Jerome Powell was reappointed by the last administration to say that inflation is a problem when it clearly was. That it wasn't just transitory and that they needed to start making real cuts and had to accelerate those cuts. They had to do them very fast, kind of a shock to the system. And now a lot of the concern is, hey, we see disinflation in front of our eyes based on the numbers. And if you used real-time shelter data, housing data, the number would be even lower. And so are we waiting too long to have a more neutral rate? Not a stimulus rate like we saw during COVID, but a neutral rate, which would really only be maybe a half of a point to be truly neutral. And I think that's what the more bullish members of the FOMC are pushing for. One more note here from Nick T over at the Wall Street Journal, highlighting what they didn't say in the minutes. Okay, last year at every meeting until December, the staff forecast called for inflation to return to 2% by 2027. But in December, they pushed that back to 2028. We're at 2.4 right now on CPI. But in the minutes for that January meeting, no date is specified for when inflation gets to 2%. So in January, they didn't specify a date. You know, in 3 months, they went from 2027 to 2028 to no date. Instead, they just said the forecast is slightly higher on balance. Yeah, because maybe they're now realizing, wow, 2028 was a little bit too far. Or maybe they just have no idea. They've had no idea on a lot in the past. So the half sentence from December to reach 2% in 2028 does not appear in this meeting. So they didn't even document where now they think they're going to get to their desired 2% target, even though inflation since 1950 in this country has averaged 3.5, but we got to get to 2. Okay. On housing related conversations here in the minutes, there wasn't much, but there was some. If I go to maybe probably what I thought was the most important comment here, several participants did remark that the ongoing moderation in inflation for housing services was likely to continue to exert downward pressure on overall inflation. So they continue to acknowledge that this is likely. And if they used, the hot sheet show notes, they would see that real-time data, not the data that they're looking at, suggests that, it's not just coming, but it is actually maybe pushing inflation below the 2% target, the real-time data on shelter, on rent. If they look at Trueflation, if they look at the hot sheet show notes, they'd see that. So they are acknowledging, hey, I don't know how much longer we can kind of hang on to this and keep holding back, because we're going to see lower inflation numbers, yet we don't want to do anything because we're worried that we might not see lower inflation numbers. Okay. All right. There's your FOMC meeting minutes. Not much else there. Again, you get 19 governors and regional presidents that participate, only 12 vote. You had a 10-2 vote, if you remember. So out of those 19 in the minutes, you have those participants. You could have more dissension than 2. It sounds like there was. The betting, or not the betting, but the markets, because the betting markets say no cut over the next 2 months when you look at Polymarket, but the investing markets rather, they are betting from their investments on cuts later this year. Okay. So the highest probability June, that would be potentially Kevin Warsh's first meeting. Additional cuts are being priced in for September or October. So investors are saying, hey, we're going to get 2 cuts. Now, the committee, here's something that's interesting. The committee did address, okay, what would happen if, there's nobody new appointed? Well, they, in this meeting minutes, they address if, say, Congress doesn't put Kevin Warsh through and there's going to be some kind of, political squabble on, approving the next Fed chair, which many people in Congress have said we will not vote in a new Fed chair while the DOJ is investigating Jerome Powell. And that's coming from both sides of the aisle. Nothing's ever 100% here, but I'm just saying you have voices from both sides of the aisle saying we will not vote in the next Fed chair while the DOJ is investigating current Fed chair because we feel like that is highly political. And so if Kevin Warsh doesn't get in, what was decided here at the FOMC is that if there's no new Fed chair past May, the end of Jerome Powell's tenure, that means Jerome Powell will remain in for all of 2026, meaning Jerome Powell is your Fed chair until Congress approves a new Fed chair. Okay, so that's kind of what that means. But they basically formalized that known factor there. Okay. Home buyers, their down payments are shrinking according to this recent report, and typical home buyers down payment dropped year over year in December to $64,000. That was a 1.5% drop. So those down payments fall slightly. If you just take a look at, okay, what does that mean? They're still relatively the highest they've been in 10 plus years. Right now you have a very strong buyer. Okay, all these concerns about what might happen to the housing market. I was going back and forth on Instagram last night on one. What might happen to the housing market? These buyers are very financially strong. They have cash. They have to put down more cash based on obviously the rates. They don't have, where the prices have gone, but obviously the rates as well is a choice that more buyers are making. It is slightly down, It's slightly down. Well, we also know affordability is at its best place in 4 years. So you would assume that as affordability loosens up slowly, that down payment would come down too. Year over year change in median down payment, it's a 1.5% drop. You don't have huge swings on this outside of huge stimulating times like COVID, stimulating for government reasons. The typical U.S. home buyer puts 15% down. That's not, uncommon for the last 5-6 years. But if you look at, 2015 to 2021, 2020, it was about 10%. So it is a higher bump from where we were pre-COVID. The fact that it has moved down does show that we are starting to thaw out the lock-in. We are starting to thaw out from this kind of real estate recession. Another example, it's going to take time, but another example that, okay, there are trends heading into the direction of recovery for this real estate market, and it's going to take time. When I was on the Real Word this week, it's like, hey, if you're a buyer, would you wait for the government to, change some of the rules around real estate so that it becomes a better, situation, a better market? I mean, I wouldn't wait for the government to do anything. The government's the most inefficient body we have. I'd rather know what the facts are right now. Work with, buyers want to work with a great agent that can bring clarity to the confusion. If I know exactly what I can afford and I know what the opportunities are now, and you're able to show me leverage points in this market, then I want to act now. Wait around for the government? Are you kidding me? It's just crazy. Okay. Unemployment. Department of Labor reports that initial claims for the week, this was released today, were 206,000. It's the decrease from 23,000 from the previous week's revised level. This puts the 4-week moving average at 219,000, a decrease of 1,000 from the previous week's revised level. No news here on unemployment. Okay. Anything under 250,000 on the 4-week moving average, we're at 219,000, is just kind of a normal situation. Remember, unemployment just came down on the big jobs report, down to 4.3. And, that historically, let's just look. I'm telling you, hey, 3.5% on inflation since 1950. What is the average unemployment rate since 1950? Okay. It's hovered around 5.6 to 5.8. So when we talk about 4.3 or 4.4 or 4.5, this has been a strong number. We've had strong unemployment for, multiple years. Okay. The unemployment rate has not presented the problem, which also means that gives cover, stability in the job market, even though we're so pessimistic right now as a society. Everything is pessimistic about everything, and we've been that way for quite some time. But, we're pessimistic about the future of jobs for a variety of reasons, technological reasons, political reasons, all the reasons. But the reality right now is unemployment is not an issue. And that gives cover to the Fed to say they would be forced into cuts if unemployment was showing it was going up. If the job market was showing major cracks, which it's not. And so here's another week of evidence there, which starts to get into the, consensus that, hey, rates might not be moving up, down all that much. But we are in a really good spot for rates. We're at 4.09 right now on the 10-year. There is some belief out there that we're going to break below 4, but, is it going to move rates all that much? I mean, we're at 6.05 right now on the 30-year fix. I know 5.99, it's an ego thing. I got 5.99, as opposed to telling somebody I got 6.05. But we're talking about, a monthly subscription to, Netflix or something on the difference between the, or not even, a cup of coffee a month or something on the difference between 6.05 and 5.99. It's incrementally, it's a mental barrier, but the money is incremental. 4.09 is where we start the day. That's on the low end of the last 90 days. And on the low side, obviously, of the last 30 as well. 30-year fixed mortgage comes in just a tick up from where we were on the last two readings, 6.05 as mentioned. And that's where we head into this Thursday. We'll get 2 more readings this week, 1 today, 1 tomorrow. And there you go. There's your hot sheet here for the day. I'll be back with you guys tomorrow to close out the week. If you want more access directly to me, join me in BAMX, school.com/BAMX. I answer 100% of these, the DMs. That's the place to DM me, not on Instagram. I will answer 100% of these. And I'll also see you every single Tuesday before the hot sheet on the live role play masterminds every single day, 9 a.m. Eastern time, right before the hot sheet. The replays are all available inside of the classroom role play masterminds, and every single script that we use is right below the replay for your access. Join me inside of BAMX, school.com/BAMX. Appreciate you guys here on the hot sheet. And I will see you next time. Until then, toodaloo.